I am writing, shooting, and publishing this review of a James Bond-themed Star Trek episode on Pierce Brosnan's birthday. Why have I done this? Because this episode originally aired a week and a half after GoldenEye, Pierce Brosnan's first Bond film, opened in theaters? No. Actually, it's a complete coincidence. I only mention it here because I happened to notice people tweeting about it being Brosnan's birthday as I was procrastinating online before starting the script, and I thought it was somewhat interesting, if ultimately meaningless. Like life! This is a review of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode, Our Man Bashir. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know how much better James Bond movies would be if they were only an hour long, be warned, spoilers beyond this point. What happens when Dr. Bashir's spy fiction sex fantasy is interrupted, first by an uninvited Garrick, then by an unexpected emergency that threatens the lives of most of the rest of the cast? If you guessed hilarity ensues, you are correct. Let's hop on a jet to Kowloon. We begin with a senior henchman by the name of Falcon being thrown through a pane of glass. As it turns out, he was thrown by Bashir, who casually turns back to his companion like, I believe we were about to get drunk and have mutually disappointing sex. Falcon stands and creeps up behind Bashir, but luckily Bashir sees him in the reflection of the bottle, spins around and pops the cork right in his face, knocking him flat on his back unconscious. Lot of kick for a 45 dom, says our man Bashir. He starts making out with his lady friend when he's interrupted by applause from this guy. Bashir's lady friend says, "Who's that?" And Bashir's like, "He's this friend of mine who a bunch of the fans are constantly trying to ship me with, even though we actually barely get along." Bashir asks Garrick what he's doing here, and Garrick's just like, "I don't know, I guess I was just bored and wanted to amuse myself by sticking my nose in your business. Anyway, I'm here now. Let's get started with our low-stakes holographic frolic." Bashir agrees to let Garrick accompany him in the program, which, as we can already tell, is a James Bond-style spy adventure. The setting is Earth, the year is 1964, and Bashir is a secret agent in the employ of Great Britain. While Bashir is explaining all this and Garrick is introduced to Bashir's personal valet, Mona Lovesit, we cut to outside the holosuite, where Eddington has command of the station, and Sisko, Kira, Worf, Dax, and O'Brien are on a runabout preparing to dock. They have just arrived back after one of those conferences that requires most of the main characters to leave at the same time. Before the runabout can dock, there's a malfunction. The runabout has been sabotaged. Eddington beams everyone out, but the runabout explodes as the transporter is engaged. Everyone is beamed out in time, but the explosion has damaged the station's transporter, so they can't be beamed in. Their patterns are just stuck in the transporter. Odo shows up like, "Shit, I'm glad I turned down the invitation to that conference. Quick, we need to save their patterns before they start to degrade inside the transporter." "Why do you know so much about transporters?" "Because I'm the only other main character here." Eddington wipes most of the memory from the station's computer and saves the transporter patterns of all 5 crew members from the runabout, but when he checks the databanks, he can only find their neural patterns, meaning, their minds, their consciousnesses. What happened to their physical patterns? Meanwhile, in the holosuite, Bashir and Garrick have changed clothes, and Bashir is still catching Garrick up on the whole 20th century spy fiction genre when suddenly, on a hidden bed that rotates out from behind a wall, just because, there's Major Kira. Or at least she looks like Major Kira. She says her name is Colonel Anastasia Kamenanov of the KGB. At first, Bashir assumes Kira has teamed up with Garrick to invade his program and annoy him, but pretty soon, Bashir and Garrick both realize that this isn't Kira. Bashir contacts Ops and Eddington realizes where the physical patterns of the crew are and explains to Bashir what's going on. The physical patterns of the crew on the runabout are being stored in the holosuite. Until they can figure out a way to transfer everyone's neural and physical patterns out of the computer and rematerialize them, it's very important that Bashir keep the holosuite program running and not even call for the exit because they don't know what the slightest interruption in the program could mean in this unprecedented and unstable situation. Bashir's like, "Cool, that shouldn't be a problem." Kira's like, can we get to the fake plot now? She hands Bashir a dossier with information about a series of earthquakes that have occurred at various points across the planet in the last 24 hours. Also, this renowned seismologist, Professor Honeybear, who has been given the image of Dax, has disappeared. Because unexplained global earthquakes is kind of a big deal, the British and the Russians are teaming up. Their mission is to find out who is causing these quakes and why. Falcon shows up again, this time in the image of O'Brien. With some help from one of Kira's earrings, which is actually a smoke bomb, Bashir, Garrick, and Kira knock out Falcon and his thugs. Garrick gets potatoed in the mouth, which lets everyone know that the holosuite safeties are off. With no time to lose in rescuing Dax, Bashir, Garrick, and Kira head to Paris, where it's suspected that Dax, along with dozens of other notable people from around the world, have been kidnapped by a man named Dr. Noah. They arrive at the club in Paris, where Dax and the other suspected abductees were last seen. Bashir pretends to be a world-famous geologist. They meet Dr. Noah's associate, Duchamp, played by Worf, who agrees to take them to Dr. Noah in exchange for 5 million francs. So Bashir does some James Bond shit, wins all the money he needs from Worf himself in a game of Baccarat, and Worf says, well, a deal's a deal. I'll take you to Dr. Noah. Let me just get your plane ticket. And he renders them all instantly unconscious with a knockout gas cigar I assume he got from the Penguin. Meanwhile, Eddington and Odo, with help from Rom and Quark, since it's Quark's holosuite everyone's physical patterns are saved in, have come up with a plan. They'll connect the holosuite and the station's computer to the transporter aboard the Defiant and beam everyone in that way. When Eddington sees the mess of cables Rom has run into the Defiant to make the necessary interfaces, he's like, oh, man, when Chief O'Brien sees all this, he's going to be so pissed at me, I might have to leave Starfleet altogether. Back in the holosuite, Bashir, Garrick, and Kira come to and find that they have been transported to the secret headquarters of Dr. Noah, high atop one of the slopes of Mount Everest. Dr. Noah enters, and he is played, of course, by Captain Sisko. Dax is here too. Apparently she and Sisko are working together. Sisko explains his evil supervillain plan. Using powerful lasers he has installed at strategic sites around the world, he will soon trigger a massive global earthquake that will open fissures in the Earth's crust, releasing millions of tons of lava, which in turn will cause the size of the Earth's surface to shrink, which will cause the oceans to rise and cover all the land upon the Earth except for the upper portion of Mount Everest, which will become an island populated by humanity's best and brightest who have been abducted by Dr. Noah over the past few months and brought here to live and begin a new future for the human race. All except for you, Mr. Bashir. Ha ha! I knew you weren't really a geologist all along, and now it's time to dispose of you and your friend? Partner? I mean, we have lunch a few times a week, and I helped him detox this one time, but I wouldn't even call us friends, really. Partner is fine. Sisko spares Kira, reasoning that a woman like her will be useful in repopulating society, but he handcuffs Bashir and Garrick to the base of one of his earthquake lasers and starts a 5-minute countdown, at the end of which the laser will fire and they will be incinerated by the eruption of lava. Garrick's like, okay, screw everybody's transporter patterns, let's just end this program instead of being killed by molten rock. But Bashir is like, no, we can still save everyone, and I know how. Fortunately, Dax has arrived to perform a final checklist on the big laser, and Bashir manages to convince her to give him the handcuff key by paying her 2 compliments. Garrick's like, objectify the girl, get the key. They never taught us that in the Obsidian Order. On their way back to rescue the others, Garrick stops Bashir and says, okay, but seriously, we need to end this program before we get killed. There's no guarantee you'll be able to save everyone anyway. The odds are against us. You're not a real spy, man. You're just playing at doing what I really did. And when you're a real spy, you realize that sometimes you need to make hard decisions, and sometimes you have to know when to cut your losses and walk away. Like so! Garrick starts to call for the exit, but Bashir shoots him in the neck with a little gun he pulled out of his shoe. He's fine, it's only a flesh wound, and Bashir's like, come on, let's get back to Dr. Noah's lavish but tasteless sitting room. Garrick's like, lead on, I've never found you more attractive than at this moment. Bashir and Garrick burst in on the villains and disarm them, but then Worf shows up with his own gun, and Sisko is once again in control. Eddington contacts Bashir to tell him they're about to beam the crew out of there. They only need 2 more minutes. Bashir is like, I've got this. He turns to Sisko and says, So, Dr. Noah, your whole drowning humanity starting over on an island that used to be Mount Everest plan? I dig it. I want in. Perhaps your New World Order could even use a man of my talents. Sisko's like, I don't buy it. You're Mr. Super Spy, always fucking my shit up. Why would you switch to my side now? Because sometimes being a spy means making the hard decisions and knowing when to cut your losses and walk away. And Garrick's over there watching like, this motherfucker here. Bashir says, here, look, I'll prove that I'm on your side. And he activates the laser and drowns the entire world. Sisko's like, no shit. I gotta hand it to you. I honestly didn't expect you to do that. Anyway, time to die. But just as Sisko is about to shoot Bashir, the transporter energizes, and Sisko, Kira, Dax, Worf, and O'Brien are all beamed out of the holosuite and onto the Defiant, where they materialize as themselves. They don't even do one of those wacky twist endings where they're all physically intact, but they've swapped personalities. You don't do that at the end of a James Bond episode. It's not on theme. On the holosuite, Bashir and Garrick are wrapping things up. Bashir's like, saving the day by destroying the world. I bet they didn't teach you that in the Obsidian Order. Oh, they did, but they didn't teach me about the value of indulging in fantasy every once in a while to keep your mind sharp, or how getting shot in the neck can have an amplifying effect on pre-existing homoerotic desire. Hey, next time we have lunch, let's have it at your place in Hong Kong, unless you've had your fill of this holosuite program. No, says Bashir. In fact, if I'm sure of one thing, it's this. That Julian Bashir's secret agent will return. Right, like tomorrow for lunch? No, I mean, yes, literally, but that's not, I was doing a thing. I don't get it. The end! My favorite holodeck episode. Why is this my favorite holodeck episode? 3 factors converge to make that happen. First, it's a very smart, very well-observed James Bond parody that doesn't push too hard. This isn't Austin Powers. I like Austin Powers. Well, mostly the first one, honestly, but this isn't Austin Powers. It never tips too far into spoof territory. There are a few broad bits, the cartoonish, sexually suggestive names of the women, Mona Loves It, Professor Honeybear, etc., the knocking the bad guy out with the champagne cork gag, but mostly the episode succeeds by presenting James Bond tropes with a wink and a nod. Written by Ronald D. Moore from a story by Bob Gillen and directed by Winrick Colby, our man Bashir is a wonderful example of how to do highly specific referential humor without pandering to the audience or double underlining the gags to make sure nobody misses them. The episode demonstrates how, if you do everything right, you don't have to sacrifice intelligence for cleverness. Because the premise involves characters playing a James Bond-like program on the holodeck, a certain amount of self-awareness is acceptable and expected. But when Bashir gets himself and Garrick out of trouble by knowingly doing what James Bond would do in that situation, he doesn't toss out a quip that makes direct reference to a scene from a Bond movie. He just does it. The script doesn't draw our attention to the fact that Dr. Noah's name is similar to Dr. No. It lets us notice it. Even with the meta elements in place, the jokes are allowed to speak for themselves. Now, granted, some of the indirectness of the Bond references were probably done for legal reasons. Star Trek was and is a Paramount property. James Bond is owned by MGM. And even though they'd probably be in the clear because parody is generally considered to be an exception to copyright restrictions, I'm sure Ronald D. Moore wanted to avoid any unnecessary litigation. Oh, fun fact, as far as that goes, despite containing no direct references to Bond, after this episode aired, the producers received a letter from MGM. I'm guessing from someone in the legal department. The exact contents of that letter have never been revealed publicly, but according to the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion, MGM wasn't very happy, which presumably is why we've never gotten that Star Trek Bill and Ted crossover. Just because the Bond references may have been indirect for legal reasons, that doesn't mean the episode shouldn't have been written like that anyway. The meta elements of our man Bashir aren't just there for yucks, they connect to character as well. Sure, a Bashir-Garrick buddy episode is a fun idea in and of itself, but making Garrick Bashir's partner in a James Bond spoof is a stroke of brilliance given Garrick's background as an intelligence operative. He spends most of the episode somewhere between amused and bewildered at what he's seeing, and ultimately it comes out that despite his protests to the contrary, he's a little insulted at the way Bashir has enjoyed using his very real and very serious former line of work as the basis for a fluffy fantasy. The problem of the episode is how to keep the holodeck program running long enough without anyone getting killed for Eddington, Odo, and Rom to beam the trapped crew members out of there, but the real conflict of the episode winds up being between Garrick and Bashir. Before I move on, I also want to acknowledge the contributions of the music, costume, and set design departments to this one. They all usually do great work, but for this episode in particular, they all help to sell the Bond aesthetic. The sets are great. Bashir's Kowloon penthouse with its gratuitous hidden rotating bed. Dr. Noah's Himalayan sanctuary with the wall-sized electronic map of the world, mandatory for a Bond villain. The wardrobe is on point. How surprisingly good does Garrick look in a turtleneck, by the way? And the score by Jay Chataway with the horn section occasionally squealing out a Bondish theme brings it all home. Fantastic work from everyone. So, solid, well-done James Bond spoof. That's factor number one. Factor number two, in addition to all the Bond tropes, the episode also makes very clever use of the established tropes of a holodeck show. We've got a lot of the classics in this one. The characters are trapped in the holodeck. The safety protocols have been disabled. There's a malfunction that could kill everyone, or almost everyone. Almost everyone we give a shit about anyway. To give the characters outside the holodeck time to figure out how to rescue the characters who have become trapped in the program, Bashir needs to keep the program running. But in another very smart twist, Bashir realizes that in order to save his friends, he doesn't need to actually defeat the bad guy in the program. He just needs to keep the program going and keep the characters being played by his friends from getting killed. As Garrick says at the end, Bashir saves the day by destroying the world. It's another trope from holodeck episodes, also found in lots of other stories that involve characters finding themselves trapped in video games, that in order to save the day, the hero has to win the game. Our man Bashir flips that expectation on its head. Bashir doesn't have to win the game. It doesn't matter if Dr. Noah destroys the world or not. There is no world. It's just a game. Because his objectives are now separate from those of the James Bond character he's playing in the program, Bashir can do things the other characters genuinely don't expect. He can act in direct defiance of the requirements of the game and the tropes of the genre being parodied because his goals have become detached from both. Factor number three in making this my favorite holodeck episode, and really, the first two are important, but this is the big one. The premise allows the cast to ham it up. I love it when Star Trek actors are given the opportunity to play someone other than their primary characters, and I love it even more when those opportunities come with a license to overact as they see fit. The made-up technical details of the episode's premise do come off as a little contrived. A Cardassian terrorist cell sabotages the runabout carrying Sisko, Kira, Worf, Dax, and O'Brien, and the runabout explodes at the exact moment Eddington is beaming them out, which blows out the transporter and requires the patterns of Sisko, Kira, Worf, Dax, and O'Brien to be saved in the holosuite where, coincidentally, Bashir is running a James Bond program. It's quite a complicated scenario when you think about it, but none of that matters because it's all just a setup for Avery Brooks cutting the fuck loose. Other members of the cast have fun too. Nana Visitor makes the most of her Natasha Fatal accent and gets one of the funniest bits of physical comedy in the episode when she appears to be reclining sensually on the bed next to Bashir, only to sit up and reveal she was just reaching behind her head for a folder. And Terry Farrell plays Professor Honeybear's virginal, beautiful me reaction to Bashir's flirtation in the laser cave just perfectly. But Avery Brooks is the main event here. I have long believed that he, not Shatner, is the greatest overactor in the Star Trek franchise, and this episode is Exhibit A in that case. As Dr. Noah, he leaves no scenery unchewed. He indulges every single one of his eccentricities as a performer. The facial tics, the theatrical body language, the explosively over-the-top line readings, the impenetrable commitment to everything this character says and does, no matter how preposterous, the monumental melodrama of it all. It is glorious. How jealous must Andrew Robinson have been having to sit there and watch while Avery Brooks marched around devouring an entire soundstage? I can overact just as well as he can. He can't do this to me. I want a lawyer. I have rights. You want your James Bond jokes? We gotcha. You want your Bashir and Garrick buddy comedy? We gotcha. You want your inventive twist on a holodeck show? We gotcha. You want most of your main cast spending most of the episode playing to the cheap seats? Oh, we got all you can handle. It's my favorite holodeck episode. It's one of my favorite comedy episodes, if not my favorite one of those two. And it's one of my favorite Deep Space Nine episodes, period, and proof positive that Deep Space Nine didn't always have to be serious to be at its best. Those are my thoughts on Our Man Bashir. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next time for a review of another holodeck episode, or should I say, holosuite episode, since we're sticking with Deep Space Nine for one more round in this batch. Next time, it's an episode that has some things in common with the episode I just reviewed. It also takes place in a holosuite program set on Earth in the 1960s, and that's about it. The episode is from Deep Space Nine's 7th season, and it's called It's Only a Paper Moon. See you then. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.